Facial nerve. It is the seventh cranial nerve. It is a nerve of second pharyngeal arch. It is a mixed nerve, that is, it has both motor and sensory fibers. Functional components and nuclei of facial nerve. There are four functional components. Two are efferent and two are afferent. Number one, special visceral efferent. It arises from motor nucleus of the facial nerve present in the lower part of the pons and ends by supplying the muscles of facial expression. Number two, general visceral efferent. It carries preganglionic parasympathetic fibers. They arise from superior salivatory nucleus and lacrimatory nucleus and supplies the lacrimal gland, submandibular and sublingual salivary glands, and also the mucus of the nasal cavity and palate. Number three, special visceral afferent. It carries taste sensations from the anterior two-thirds of the tongue and passes through the geniculate ganglion and terminates in the nucleus of tractus solitarius. Number four, general somatic afferent. It carries sensations from the skin of the auricle and terminates in the spinal nucleus of trigeminal nerve. So these are the four nuclei and the functional components of the facial nerve. Course and relations of the facial nerve. The facial nerve has two main roots. A large motor root known as facial nerve proper and a small sensory root known as nervus intermedius. The two roots of the facial nerve arise from the lower border of the pons. This is the midbrain, pons, medulla oblongata. Lower border of the pons, just above the olive of the medulla oblongata. So it is emerging from the lower border of pons, exactly just above the olive of the medulla oblongata. So this is the facial nerve, two roots, motor and sensory. After emerging from the pontomedullary angle, the two roots runs laterally along with the vestibulocochlear nerve, that is the 8th cranial nerve, to reach the internal aquastic meatus. In the internal aquastic meatus, so this is the internal aquastic meatus. So in the internal aquastic meatus, the motor root of the facial nerve lies in a groove formed by the vestibulocochlear nerve. So in the internal aquastic meatus, the motor root of the facial nerve runs in a groove formed by the vestibulocochlear nerve, and between the motor root and the vestibulocochlear nerve the sensory root of the facial nerve runs accompanied by the labyrinthine artery. On the lateral end of the internal acoustic meatus, the two roots joins to form the main trunk of the facial nerve. The facial nerve enters the facial canal in the petrous part of the temporal bone. The facial canal is divided into three components. Number one, labyrinthine part of facial canal. Number two, tympanic part of the facial canal. Number three, mastoid part of the facial canal. The labyrinthine part of the facial canal lies just above the vestibule of the bony labyrinth and makes a sharp bend to reach the anterior-superior part of the medial wall of middle ear. The tympanic part of the facial canal runs horizontally backwards till the junction of medial and posterior wall of the middle ear. The mastoid part of the facial canal starts from the junction of medial and posterior wall of the middle ear and descends vertically downwards on the posterior wall of the middle ear till it reaches the stylomastoid foramen. In the labyrinthine part of the facial canal, the facial nerve makes a sharp bend. Genu means bend, makes a sharp bend and forms a genu, which possesses a ganglion known as geniculate ganglion. This is a schematic diagram to explain the facial canal and the course of the facial nerve in the facial canal. The facial canal is divided into three parts. Number one, labyrinthine part. Number two, tympanic part. Number three, mastoid part. Labyrinthine part of the facial canal starts above the vestibule and bends to reach the anterior-superior part of the medial wall of the middle ear. This is the medial wall of the middle ear. This is the superior and this is the inferior part, and this is the anterior and this is the posterior part of the medial wall of the middle ear. So it makes a sharp bend to reach the anterior-superior part of the medial wall of the middle ear. The tympanic part of the facial canal runs horizontally backwards on the medial wall of the middle ear till the junction of medial and the posterior wall of the middle ear. The mastoid part of the facial canal starts from the junction of medial and posterior wall of the middle ear and runs vertically downwards on the posterior wall of the middle ear till it reaches the stylomastoid foramen. See, this is the mastoid process, this is the styloid process, and this is the stylomastoid foramen. Then the nerve exits from the skull by passing through the stylomastoid foramen. See, the labyrinthine part of the facial canal up to this, that is the labyrinthine part. In the labyrinthine part of the facial canal, there is a sharp bend. Bend is known as genu. So, in that part, the facial nerve possesses a ganglion in the genu, and that is known as geniculate ganglion. emerging out of the stylomastoid foramen, the facial nerve enters the posterior-medial surface of the parotid gland and it divides into 5 terminal branches within the substance of the parotid gland. The terminal branches emerges from the anterior border of the parotid gland and ends by supplying the muscles of facial expression. So this is the course and relations of facial nerve. Branches and distribution. Branches and distribution. There are 3 branches arising from the facial nerve in the facial canal and 3 branches from the facial nerve after the emerging out of the stylomastoid foramen and 5 terminal branches in the face, that is in the parotid gland. Branches in the facial canal. Number 1, greater petrosal nerve. It arises from the geniculate ganglion. It joins with the deep petrosal nerve to form the nerve of pterygoid canal, which runs in the pterygoid canal. And they relate the pterygopalatine ganglion. The post-ganglionic fibers arising from the pterygopalatine ganglion supplies the lacrimal gland and also the glands of the nasal cavity and soft palate. Number 2, nerve to stapedius. This is a stapedius muscle. So it supplies the stapedius muscle. Number 3, chorda tympani. It arises from the facial nerve 6 mm above the stylomastoid foramen and it enters the pterygotympanic fissure, then infratemporal fossa where it joins the lingual nerve and relays in the submandibular ganglion. It has 2 types of fibers. The parasympathetic fibers, which supplies the sublingual and submandibular salivary gland, and taste fibers for the anterior 2/3 of the tongue. Branches of facial nerve. After emerging from the stylomastoid foramen, there are 3 branches. Number 1, posterior auricular nerve, which supplies the occipital belly of occipitofrontalis. Number 2, digastric branch, which supplies the posterior belly of digastric muscle. Number 3, nerve to stylohyoid, which supplies the stylohyoid muscle. The 5 terminal branches are temporal branch, zygomatic branch, buccal branch, marginal mandibular branch and cervical branch. This supplies the muscles of facial expression, including the frontal belly of occipitofrontalis. How to remember the branches of facial nerve? Through mnemonics. There are 3 branches in the facial canal. Number 1, G stands for greater petrosal nerve and N stands for nerve to stapedius and C stands for chorda tympani. So G, N, C, good night QT. emerging from the stylomastoid foramen. Posterior auricular nerve. P stands for posterior auricular nerve. D stands for nerve to posterior bill of digastric, and S stands for nerve to stylohyoid muscle. So PDS, public distribution system. And facial nerve branches in the face. That is the 5 terminal branches. 2 zebra bit my cat. Temporal branch, zygomatic branch, buccal branch, marginal mandibular branch, and cervical branch. Applied anatomy of facial nerve. In the lesions of facial nerve, there are 2 types. One is supranuclear lesion and another is infranuclear lesion. In case of the supranuclear lesion of the facial nerve, the lower part of the face is affected. The upper part of the face is not affected, since the corticonuclear fibers supplying the upper part of the face is coming from both the motor area of the right and left cerebral cortex. So it has corticonuclear fibers from both cerebral hemispheres. So for example, the left side of the corticonuclear fibers are damaged, only the lower half of the right side of the face is affected, whereas the upper 2/3 of the facial muscles are not affected, because the upper 2/3 of the facial muscles are supplied by both the side corticonuclear fibers arising from the cerebral cortex. So in upper motor neuron lesion, there is only lower part of the face is affected on the contralateral side. Okay. Next, in lower motor neuron lesion, that is damage to the motor nucleus of the facial nerve or the entire course. In the entire course of the facial nerve, if there is any injury or damage, the entire face, half of the face is paralyzed, and it occurs on the same side, that is ipsilateral side. And paralysis of the muscles of facial expression is known as Bell's palsy. The symptoms of Bell's palsy include absence of transverse furrows in the forehead on the affected side, tight closure of the eye is not possible on the affected side, absence of nasolabial fold on the affected side, deviation of the angle of the mouth on the unaffected side, dribbling of saliva on the affected side, collection of food or water in the vestibule of the mouth on the affected side. So these are the symptoms of Bell's palsy. Ramsay-Hunt syndrome. It is a condition in which the geniculate ganglion is affected by herpes zoster virus. So this results in hyperacusis, that is increased sensitivity of hearing, loss of lacrimation, loss of salivation and loss of taste sensations and Bell's palsy on the ipsilateral side.